12 apex predators stood in the atrium, genetically engineered for absolute slaughter, armed with plasma rifles that could melt a tank. They had conquered star systems. They had never known defeat. They were looking at an old man holding a mop. Biden, a mop? He had a bad back, an overdue light bill, and 0 patience left for the day. What happened next wasn't a battle. It was a brutal, humiliating masterclass in violence from a species that perfected it. Henry hated the floors in Sector 4. They were made of a synthetic quartz composite, polished to a mirror shine that reflected the sterile, cold light of the orbital station. The alien dignitaries who glided over them loved the aesthetic. To them, the gleaming surfaces represented the transparency and purity of the Galactic Coalition. To Henry, it just meant every single scuff mark. Spilled nutrient, drink, and microscopic speck of dust showed up like a beacon in the night. He leaned against the handle of his industrial floor scrubber, listening to the rhythmic mechanical hum of the brushes. His lower back offered a familiar throbbing complaint. He ignored it. At 58 years old, pain wasn't a warning sign anymore. It was just background noise. Henry wore a faded blue jumpsuit with sanitation stitched over the left breast in Terran Standard, and below that a barcode that the station's automated security scanners read to ensure he belonged there. He was a human. Out here on their spire, a deep space diplomatic hub orbiting a neutral gas giant, humans were little more than a novelty. A young, soft-skinned species from a high-gravity death world that had barely figured out faster than light travel before stumbling onto the galactic stage. The greater galactic community viewed humanity with a mixture of mild amusement and pity. They had no natural armor, no redundant organs, no psionic capabilities. What humans did have was an excess of cheap labor, willing to cross the stars to mop floors, fix plumbing, and haul cargo just to send a few universal credits back to their overcrowded colonies. Henry squeezed the trigger on the scrubber, releasing a heavy dose of blue ammonia-based solvent over a particularly stubborn streak of black grease left by a passing cargo drone. Mr. Pendleton Henry eased off the trigger and turned. Standing a few feet away, clutching a data pad to her chest like a shield, was Chloe. She was 22, fresh out of some diplomatic academy in Geneva, and currently serving as a glorified errand runner for the human ambassador. She looked exhausted. Her blonde hair was fraying out of a tight bun, and the dark circles under her eyes spoke of too many late-night translation shifts. "Just Henry, kid," he said, his voice a low, growly rasp. He leaned on the machine, giving his bad knee a break. "You shouldn't be out this late. The delegates from the inner rings get a little rowdy after the ambassadorial dinners." Chloe offered a weak smile. "I know." Ambassador Hayes left his secure terminal unlocked in the negotiation suite. "If I don't go back and log it out, station security will find the delegation again, and I really can't afford to get yelled at today." Henry reached into the deep pocket of his coveralls and pulled out a foil-wrapped protein bar. He tossed it to her. She caught it awkwardly against her data pad. "Eat something," Henry said. "You look like you're about to blow her away in the ventilation draft." "Thank you, Henry," she said, her smile reaching her eyes this time. "You're the only one on this whole station who actually notices I'm alive." "That's because I look at the floor, kid. Most of these aliens look right over our heads. Now go secure that terminal and go to bed." He watched her hurry down the sprawling, immaculate corridor, her soft footsteps echoing in the quiet night cycle. Henry turned back to his scrubber, pushing the heavy machine forward. He knew exactly what Chloe meant. Invisibility was the defining human experience on the spire. Down the hall, the heavy blast doors hissed open. Henry didn't look up, but he felt the shift in the air pressure. Heavy synchronized footfalls echoed against the quartz. The sound was distinct, metallic, heavy, yet perfectly spaced. It was the Athonian Royal Guard. Henry pulled his scrubber to the side of the corridor, pressing his back against the wall, head bowed. It was standard protocol. When the guard walked, you gave way. 12 of them marched past. They were a sight that commanded awe from the civilized galaxy, genetically bred for the sole purpose of violence. They stood nearly 8 feet tall, their bodies encased in ceremonial yet highly functional obsidian armor. They didn't have faces, not really. Their helmets were smooth, featureless domes of sensory equipment that fed them real-time tactical data. Beneath the armor, Henry knew from his off-duty reading they had carbon-laced bone structures, twin hearts, and a muscular density that made them effectively bulletproof to standard kinetic weapons. They were trained from the moment they left their artificial birthing pods. Hand-to-hand combat, squad tactics, heavy weapons. They were a living, breathing deterrent. The squad leader, distinguished by a crimson slash painted across his chest plate, marched less than a foot from Henry. The alien didn't even turn his head. To the Athonian, Henry was no different than the potted synthetic ferns lining the walls. A stationary object, a non-threat. A non-threat. Henry kept his eyes on the floor, watching the heavy clawed boots of the guards strike the quartz. His jaw tightened involuntarily. He smelled the faint metallic scent of ozone and weapon-grade lubricants rolling off them. His right hand, calloused and scarred, drifted slightly toward his side, fingers curling into a loose fist. Muscle memory buried under decades of deliberate suppression twitched in the nerves of his forearm. He forced his hand to relax. He took a slow, deep breath, counting to 3. "You're a janitor," he told himself. "You clean messes. You don't make them anymore." The 12 guards turned a corner, heading toward the VIP suites. The heavy thud of their boots faded. Henry let out a long breath, a ragged exhale that tasted like old regrets. He grabbed the handle of the floor scrubber harder than necessary and went back to work. He had 3 more sectors to polish before his shift ended, and he wasn't going to let ghosts from a past life slow him down. The lockdown klaxons didn't wail. They didn't scream. The spire was too sophisticated for that. Instead, the ambient lighting in Sector 4 snapped from a soothing warm white to a stark blood-red hue, and a low subsonic pulse vibrated through the deck plates. A physical alarm designed to be felt by species without auditory canals. Henry was inside Utility Closet 4B, mixing a fresh batch of sodium hydroxide degreaser into his mop bucket. The sudden shift to red emergency lighting cast long, jagged shadows across the shelves of cleaning supplies. He didn't panic. He carefully placed the chemical jug on the shelf, wiped his hands on a rag, and stepped toward the slanted ventilation louver built into the closet door. Peering through the narrow gaps, Henry had a clear view of the central atrium of the diplomatic wing. The space was massive, designed to look like a lush indoor garden with terrace water features and exotic flora. It was currently a staging ground for a hostile takeover. The 12 Athonian guards he had seen earlier were fanning out in a textbook perimeter. They moved with a chilling mechanical efficiency. There was no shouting, no chaotic running. They simply flowed into the space, their kinetic shields shimmering with a faint purple light as they powered up. In the center of the atrium, huddled near a cascading fountain, was a group of about 20 hostages. Most were alien dignitaries, squat reptilian trade envoys and tall Avan diplomats in their silken robes, shivering and clicking in distress. And in the middle of them, clutching her data pad like a life preserver, was Chloe. Henry's eyes narrowed. His breathing slowed. The dull ache in his lower back faded, replaced by a cold, familiar clarity spreading through his chest. A station security officer, a heavy set for armed V-sassy, came charging into the atrium from the north corridor, fumbling to draw his stun baton. He barked an order in standard galactic, demanding the Athonian stand down. The Athonian squad leader didn't raise his plasma rifle. He didn't even break his stride. He simply pivoted, closed the distance with terrifying speed, and backhanded the V's across the face. The sound of the impact was sickening. A wet, heavy crunch that echoed over the gentle splashing of the fountain. The vest was thrown backward like a discarded rag doll, sliding across the polished quartz. His neck was bent at an impossible angle. Dark, viscous green blood pooled instantly beneath his head, staining the pristine floor. The atrium fell dead silent, save for the muffled sobs of an Avon ambassador. Henry watched the blood spread. He stared at it for a long, quiet moment. It was green, but blood was blood. It all smelled the same when it dried. The squad leader stepped up to the cowering hostages. He raised his left arm, tapping a sequence into the bracer on his wrist. A holographic projection flared to life. A towering image of the Athonian High General back on their home world. The general began speaking, his voice amplified through the station's hijacked PA system. He spoke of territorial disputes, of the coalition's disrespect, and of the Athonian Empire's rightful claim to the border sectors. It was a coup, a hostage negotiation. The 12 guards were here to secure the high-valued targets until the Athonian fleet arrived. Henry tuned out the political posturing. He wasn't a politician. He was a tactician. He ran his eyes over the Athonian perimeter. 12 hostiles, 2 guarding the north blast doors, 2 at the south, 4 forming an inner ring around the hostages, 3 roaming the perimeter, establishing overlapping fields of fire. The squad leader in the center. They were perfectly positioned to repel an assault from the station's heavily armed rapid response teams. Their armor was impervious to small arms fire. Their kinetic shields would absorb energy blasts. Their reaction times were genetically enhanced to be faster than a human could blink. They were gods of war, invincible, flawless, and utterly arrogant. Through the louvers, Henry saw one of the roaming guards stop near the hostages. Chloe had dropped her data pad in her trembling fear. The device clattered against the stone edge of the fountain. The Athonian guard looked down at it, then looked at Chloe slowly, deliberately. The massive alien raised a heavy armored boot and crushed the data pad into splintered glass and warped metal. The guard then leaned down, grabbing Chloe by the collar of her jacket, lifting her off her feet. She choked, kicking her legs in the air, tears streaming down her face. The guard turned her toward the holographic projection, holding her up as a prop for the general's speech, a demonstration of the fragility of the coalition's lesser species. In the dark of the utility closet, Henry closed his eyes. He saw the dust of New Odessa. He heard the screaming of the artillery shells. He remembered the smell of burning lithium and vaporized flesh. He remembered why he had sworn to never ever fight again. Humanity had fought the corporate wars in the mud and the blood, tearing each other apart with improvised weapons and sheer spiteful malice. Humans didn't fight with honor. They fought to survive. Henry opened his eyes. The cynical, tired old janitor was gone. The Athonians were apex predators, sure, but they were bred in laboratories, trained in pristine simulators, and deployed against enemies who played by the rules of conventional warfare. They didn't know what a desperate human in a dark room was capable of. They didn't understand that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't thick skin or plasma cannons. It was a total, absolute willingness to be horrifying. Henry looked at his cleaning cart. He didn't have a plasma rifle. He didn't have kinetic shielding. He had a heavy-duty carbon fiber mop handle. He had a box cutter with a rusted retracting slide. He had a 2-gallon jug of industry-all-grade sodium hydroxide mixed with ammonia, a chemical cocktail that the station's warning labels explicitly stated would cause severe corrosive damage to organic tissues upon contact. He reached out and snapped the mop head off the carbon fiber shaft. He gripped the pole. It was light, balanced, and practically unbreakable. He took the box cutter and, with a quick, practiced motion, wedged the razor-sharp tungsten blade into the splintered end of the pole, wrapping it tight with a roll of heavy-duty duct tape from his tool caddy. A spear, the oldest weapon in the human arsenal. He picked up the jug of chemical cleaner and unscrewed the cap. He grabbed a pressurized spray bottle, dumping the water out and filling it to the brim with the highly volatile toxic mixture. Henry rolled his shoulders. His back popped. His knees ocked, but the cold fire in his chest was burning bright now, overriding the pain, flooding his aging nervous system with adrenaline. He wasn't going to fight them. Fighting implied a contest. He was going to exterminate them. The Athonian guard stationed at the southern corridor entrance was bored. His internal HUD fed him a constant stream of optimal tactical data. Temperature variations, motion tracking, biosignatures of the hostages in the atrium. His kinetic shield hummed softly, a comforting blanket of invulnerability. He stood perfectly still, his plasma carbine resting against his armored chest, waiting for the station security teams to attempt a foolish breach. He didn't register the slight hiss of the pneumatic door sliding open 20 yards behind him. His sensors were calibrated to detect high-energy weapon charges, rapid movement, and heavy masses. They weren't calibrated to detect a 58-year-old man in rubber-soled shoes walking with the slow, deliberate heel-toe-toe step of a ghost. Henry approached the giant alien from behind. He didn't look at the armor. Armor was a distraction. He looked at the joints. The Athonian suit was a marvel of engineering, but basic physics dictated that mobility required gaps. The back of the knee, the crook of the elbow, and most importantly, the flexible ribbed membrane beneath the helmet that allowed the alien to turn its head. Henry stopped 2 feet behind the guard. He didn't hesitate. He didn't hold his breath. With a brutal, violent upward thrust, Henry drove the makeshift carbon fiber spear directly into the ribbed membrane at the base of the alien skull. The tungsten box cutter blade punched through the flexible synthetic weave and bit deep into the alien spinal column. The Athonian's biology was tough, but a severed central nervous system works the same way across the galaxy. The guard didn't even have time to vocalize. Its massive body went instantly rigid, the plasma rifle slipping from its lifeless fingers. Before the weapon could hit the ground and make a sound, Henry caught it with his left hand. He twisted the spear, severing the alien spinal cord completely, and pulled it free. He let the 8FT Hafton corpse collapse. It fell backward. Henry stepped aside, letting the dead weight of the alien hit the quartz floor. The thud was loud, but in the echoing expanse of the atrium it just sounded like shifting gear. 1 down, 11 to go. Henry didn't pause to admire his work. Momentum was life. He stepped over the twitching corpse, gripping the pressurized spray bottle of industrial cleaner in his left hand, his makeshift spear in his right. The 2nd Southern Guard was stationed 30 yards away, near the edge of the atrium's water feature. His back turned, watching the inner perimeter. He heard the muffled thud of his partner falling. The guard turned, his helmet visor swiving to investigate. He expected to see his squad mate adjusting his gear. Instead, he saw a small, fragile human in a blue jumpsuit charging at him with terrifying speed. The alien's enhanced reflexes kicked in. He raised his plasma carbine, his finger tightening on the trigger. Henry was already moving. He threw himself into a low slide across the polished, frictionless quartz floor, slipping entirely under the alien's line of sight. As he slid past the guard's massive legs, Henry pointed the spray bottle upward and squeezed the trigger. A concentrated stream of sodium hydroxide and ammonia blasted directly into the breathing vents and optical sensors of the Athonian's helmet. The kinetic shield designed to stop high-velocity projectiles and energy blasts didn't even register the liquid. The chemicals bypassed the shield entirely, seeping instantly into the helmet's intake valves. The reaction was catastrophic. The highly corrosive base hit the alien's sensitive ocular membranes and respiratory tract. The guard dropped his weapon, throwing both hands to his helmet, letting out a horrific, bubbling shriek that tore through the quiet atrium. He stumbled blindly, his genetically perfected combat training completely useless against the agonizing burn melting his eyes. Henry hopped to his feet from the slide. Perfectly balanced, he stepped behind the thrashing, screaming alien. He raised a carbon pole like a baseball bat and swung it with every ounce of torque his old shoulders could generate, driving the tungsten blade straight into the gap behind the alien's knee joint. The blade severed the massive tendon. The guard collapsed backward with a heavy crash, his leg useless. Henry didn't give him a second to recover. He stepped on the alien's armored chest plate. Pinning him down, raised his heavy boot and stomped downward with crushing force, driving the heel of his boot directly into the crushed ventilation grate of the helmet, snapping the alien's neck. The screaming stopped. 2 down, 10 to go. The chaotic noise of the second kill, however, had ruined his stealth. In the center of the atrium, the Athonian squad leader dropped Chloe. She hit the ground, gasping for air. The leader whipped his head toward the southern corridor. The remaining 9 guards snapped instantly toward the disturbance, their plasma rifles raising in perfect unison, red targeting lasers cutting through the dim emergency lighting. They saw their 2 fallen brothers, and they saw Henry, an old man, holding a bloody mop handle and a plastic squirt bottle, standing over a mountain of dead black armor. For a fraction of a second, the elite, bred for war Athonians, froze. It wasn't fear. It was sheer, unadulterated cognitive dissonance. It was mathematically, biologically impossible for this frail creature to have killed 2 of the Aegis. Henry wiped a speck of green blood off his cheek. He looked at the 10 massive aliens aiming weapons that could level a city block at him. He looked at Chloe, huddled on the floor, staring at him with wide, terrified eyes. He let out a long, tired sigh. "I literally just cleaned this floor," Henry muttered. He didn't run away. He didn't seek cover. He kicked the plasma carbine of the dead guard up into his hands, slapped the fire selector to full auto, and charged straight at the gods of war. 10 heavy plasma carbines illuminated the atrium in a blinding synchronized strobe of superheated destruction. Standard human infantry training dictated that when faced with overwhelming superior firepower, a soldier should immediately seek hard cover, call for suppressive fire, and wait for armored support. Henry didn't have cover. He didn't have support. He had a stolen rifle and a lifetime of bad memories. He didn't run backward. He ran diagonally, closing the distance. The Athonians were trained to track targets operating within standard combat parameters. They expected their enemy to retreat from the fatal funnel of their firing line. When Henry sprinted forward and to the left, diving into a perfectly executed forward roll across the smooth quartz, their targeting algorithms lagged by a fraction of a second. It was enough. A volley of plasma bolts slammed into the space Henry had occupied a heartbeat earlier, instantly flashing the polished floor into a crater of glowing molten slag. The ambient temperature in the atrium spiked, the air instantly tasting of scorched ozone and burning dust. Henry came out of his roll 20 feet from the closest guard. He didn't bother trying to punch through the alien's kinetic shield with center mass shots. Shields were designed to absorb direct high-velocity kinetic and thermal impacts. Instead, Henry aimed for the floor directly beneath the alien's heavy boots. He squeezed the trigger, holding it down. The stolen Athonian carbine bucked violently in his hands, its recoil heavy and brutal, threatening to dislocate his aging shoulder. A stream of blue-white plasma tore into the quartz floor, right at the guard's feet. The kinetic shield didn't extend into the ground. The floor simply vaporized. The sudden catastrophic loss of structural support beneath the Athonian's right leg caused the 8-foot giant to pitch violently to the side, its immense weight working against it. The alien stumbled, its arms flailing to maintain balance. Henry didn't give it the chance. He released the trigger, took 2 rapid steps forward, and swung the heavy, dense stock of the alien rifle like a sledgehammer, aiming not for the armored helmet, but for the exposed, flexible joint of the alien's elbow. The reinforced composite stock struck the joint with a sickening, wet crack. The alien's arm snapped backward at an unnatural angle. The guard let out a guttural roar, dropping its weapon. It spun, reaching for Henry with its good arm, its massive clawed hand, wide enough to crush a human skull like a melon. Henry ducked under the clumsy, agonized swing. He drew the tungsten-tipped box cutter from his pocket with his left hand, flicked the slide, and buried it to the hilt in the soft, unarmored crevice, where the alien's bicep met its chest plate, right where the axillary artery was located in most bipedal species. He ripped the blade sideways. Thick, dark blood sprayed in a high-pressure arc, coating Henry's blue jumpsuit. The alien collapsed, clutching its armpit, drowning in its own rapid exsanguination. 3 down, 9 to go. The remaining guards ceased their indiscriminate firing. The squad leader, recognizing the chaos, barked a series of sharp mechanical clicks and guttural commands. The Athonians immediately shifted their tactics. They stopped tracking Henry individually and moved to form a tight overlapping phalanx, their kinetic shields locking together to create a shimmering, impenetrable dome of purple energy. They were adapting. They were cutting off his angles. Henry backed away, his chest heaving, his breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. His lower back was screaming, a dull, agonizing throb radiating down his legs. The adrenaline was masking the worst of it, but his 58-year-old heart felt like it was trying to punch its way out of his rib cage. He wiped the sweat and green blood from his eyes, gripping the heavy carbine. "You're not a machine, Henry," he told himself. "Don't fight them like one." He looked up. 30 feet above the phalanx of Athonian guards hung one of the atrium's main architectural features, a massive suspended hydro tank that fed the cascading waterfalls. It was constructed of thick, transparent plast steel and held roughly 4,000 gallons of purified water. Henry didn't look at the guards. He aimed the plasma carbine straight up. The Athonian squad leader tracked Henry's movement. For a second, the alien hesitated, confused by the trajectory. Why was the human aiming at the ceiling? Henry held the trigger down. A continuous searing beam of plasma, melted through the structural supports of the hydro tank. The thick blasto bubbled, warped, and then catastrophically failed with a deafening groan of tearing metal. The entire tank ripped free from the ceiling. 4,000 gallons of water, along with hundreds of pounds of jagged plastile and twisted support beams, plummeted directly onto the Athonian phalanx. The kinetic shields were designed to deflect bullets and energy blasts. They were not designed to support the crushing localized hydrostatic weight of a falling swimming pool. The shields flared violently, screeching with a high-pitched whine as they attempted to repel the mass. Then they shattered like cheap glass. The deluge slammed into the guards. 3 of them were crushed instantly beneath the reinforced plastile casing of the tank, their armor buckling under the sheer kinetic force. The rest were swept off their feet, thrown violently across the atrium in a tidal wave of rushing water, shattered flora, and debris. Henry didn't stick around to watch the aftermath. He turned and sprinted toward the dense synthetic jungle foliage bordering the eastern wall of the atrium. He needed to disappear before they stood back up. Chloe was huddled behind the curved marble basin of a deactivated fountain. The air in the atrium was thick with steam, the result of cold water hitting the slagged, superheated craters in the floor. She was trembling so violently she could barely keep her eyes focused. She pressed her hands over her ears, trying to block out the sounds, the screams of the aliens, the deafening roar of plasma fire, the terrifying wet crunches that followed. She peeked over the edge of the marble. The beautiful, pristine atrium looked like a war zone. The automated fire suppression systems were raining chemical foam from the ceiling. Warning sirens, finally tripped by the structural damage, wailed in a dissonant, chaotic loop. Through the mist and the foam, she saw the remaining Athonians dragging themselves out of the wreckage of the hydro tank. There were 6 of them left, including the squad leader with the crimson slash on his chest. They looked battered. Their pristine black armor was scuffed and dented. Their movements were no longer perfectly synchronized. They were jittery, frantic. The squad leader stood tall, water pouring off his helmet. He raised his arm, his built-in command module, projecting a sweeping red laser grid across the dense artificial jungle where Henry had vanished. "Sweep the tree line," the leader commanded, his voice translated by the station's overhead speakers into a harsh, metallic Terran standard. "Burn the foliage. Leave nothing alive." The 5 guards moved forward, their weapons raised, laying down a punishing wall of plasma fire into the synthetic broadleaf plants and towering pseudopalms. The vegetation ignited instantly, filling the air with thick, acrid black smoke. Deep in the foliage, Henry lay flat on his stomach, perfectly still. The smoke was choking him, burning his lungs, but he welcomed it. Smoke meant concealment. Smoke leveled the playing field. He checked the power cell on his stolen carbine. It was drained. The sustained fire on the water tank had depleted it. He tossed the useless heavy weapon quietly into the mud beside him. He was unarmed again, save for his taped box cutter spear. He crawled forward on his elbows, ignoring the sharp rocks and broken glass cutting into his forearms. He moved with the slow, agonizing patience of a sniper, a skill he had learned decades ago in the corporate trench wars on New Odessa, where moving too fast meant catching a magnetic slug in the teeth through the thick, rolling black smoke. He saw the heavy boots of a guard stepping into the tree-line. The alien was sweeping his weapon left and right, his thermal sensors useless in the raging synthetic brush fire. Henry waited until the boot came down less than 3 feet from his face. He didn't strike the armor. He didn't try to stab the giant. He reached out with a handful of thick, heavy mud he had scooped from the watering trench and slammed it directly into the side of the alien's plasma carbine. right over the weapon's heat-venting ports. Plasma weapons generated astronomical amounts of heat. If they couldn't vent, they became bombs. The alien didn't even notice the mud. He squeezed the trigger to fire another volley into the trees. The weapon cycled, but the superheated gas had nowhere to go. The carbine whined, a high-pitched sound of impending catastrophic failure. The guard looked down at his weapon in confusion. Henry covered his head and rolled violently backward into a shallow irrigation ditch. The carbine detonated. The explosion was a blinding flash of blue light, followed by a concussive shock wave that ripped through the trees. The blast tore the guard's arms off at the shoulders and caved in his chest plate. The concussive force knocked the two closest Athonians flat on their backs, sending them tumbling out of the foliage and onto the quartz floor. Henry didn't wait for the ringing in his ears to stop. He scrambled out of the ditch, grabbing his box cutter spear. He vaulted out of the smoke line, lunging at the closest downed guard. The alien was disoriented, struggling to push itself up. Henry drove the heavy heel of his boot into the alien's wrist, pinning its arm to the floor. With both hands on his makeshift spear, Henry drove the tungsten blade straight down, bypassing the reinforced chest plate and punching directly through the flexible, unarmored seal at the armpit. He twisted the blade. The alien thrashed once wildly and went still. The second downed guard was already recovering. It lunged at Henry from a kneeling position, dropping its rifle and swinging a massive armored fist. Henry tried to duck, but his damaged back locked up for a fraction of a second. He was too slow. He was too slow. The backhand caught Henry in the ribs. The impact felt like being hit by a speeding hover truck. Henry was launched off his feet, flying backward 10 feet, before crashing violently into a decorative marble pillar. He heard the distinct, sickening snap of bone. Pain sharp and blinding exploded in his right side. He collapsed to the floor, gasping. He couldn't breathe. His lungs refused to expand. Every tiny movement sent shards of agony radiating through his chest. 3 ribs, he thought, his military training clinically assessing the damage through the haze of agony. Maybe 4. Lung feels intact. For now, the Athonian guard stood up, towering over Henry. The alien didn't reach for its weapon. It was furious. It wanted to break this frail, infuriating creature with its bare hands. The guard took a slow, heavy step forward, reaching down to grab Henry by the throat. Henry lay there coughing, his eyes rolling back slightly, his hands rested limply by his sides. He looked entirely broken, defeated. An old man who had finally run out of luck. The alien leaned down, its massive fingers wrapping around Henry's neck, beginning to squeeze. Henry's right hand wasn't empty. When he had hit the ground, he had fallen next to the shattered remains of one of the automated cleaning drones that had been destroyed in the crossfire. His fingers had found a jagged 8-inch shard of heavy, sharpened plastile plating. Henry wasn't defeated. He was playing possum. As the alien lifted him off the ground, Henry's eyes snapped into sharp, vicious focus. He ignored the blinding pain in his chest, gripped the plastile shard with white-knuckled intensity, and drove it upward, directly beneath the alien's chin, slipping it right past the helmet's locking collar, and deep into the creature's unarmored throat. The alien froze. Its grip on Henry's neck loosened. A thick, bubbling gurgle emanated from its helmet. Henry didn't let go. He grabbed the alien's forearm with his free hand, using his own body weight to hang from the creature, pulling the makeshift blade deeper into the arteries of its neck. "I told you," Henry rasped, his voice a bloody whisper. "I just cleaned these floors." The alien collapsed forward, pinning Henry under its immense dying weight. Henry shoved the heavy, lifeless corpse off his chest with a desperate, agonizing heave. He rolled onto his hands and knees, spitting a mouthful of blood onto the polished floor. His vision was swimming, the edges blurring with gray static. The pain in his ribs was no longer sharp. It was a deep, resonant burning that made every heartbeat feel like a hammer blow. He forced himself to his feet, leaning heavily against the marble pillar for support. He looked across the ruined atrium. There were only 3 left, the squad leader and 2 guards. They were standing in the center of the room near the huddled, terrified hostages. They weren't advancing. They were in a tight triangle formation, their weapons raised, scanning the smoke and debris. They were terrified. Henry could see it in their posture. The rigid, perfect stances of the Athonian royal guard were gone. Their movements were jerky. Their helmets darted back and forth, jumping at shadows. They had been bred for combat, trained to conquer armies. But they had never been hunted. They had never watched 9 of their invincible brothers dismantled by a single unarmed janitor who used the environment like a butcher's knife. Henry wiped his bloody mouth on the sleeve of his blue jumpsuit. He needed to finish this before station security breached the doors. If security came in now, they'd start shooting indiscriminately, and Chloe and the other hostages would be caught in the crossfire. He needed a distraction, a loud one. He limped toward a maintenance panel on the wall, dragging his right leg slightly. He pried the cover off with his bare hands, breaking a fingernail in the process. Inside was a mess of fiber optic cables and heavy power conduits that fed the Artem's lighting and climate control systems. Henry didn't know much about Athonian biology, but he knew about high-voltage electricity. He grabbed the main power conduit, a thick insulated cable, pulsing with station-raid voltage. He pulled out his taped box cutter, slicing through the heavy rubber insulation to expose the raw copper weave wire beneath. He looked at the floor. The entire atrium was flooded with 4,000 gallons of water from the ruptured tank. The water level was only about an inch deep, but it covered everything. Henry stood on the dry maintenance grating. He looked at the 3 Athonians. They were standing ankle-deep in the water. Physics, Henry thought grimly. The universal equalizer. He grabbed the exposed live wire and ripped it out of the panel, tossing it directly into the shallow pool of water, spreading across the floor. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The water violently conducted the station's heavy voltage. A blinding blue arc of electricity snapped across the surface of the pool. The 3 Athonian guards seized violently. Their advanced armor possessed internal grounding systems designed to protect against EMPs and localized shocks. But they were not built to withstand a continuous direct feed from a space station's main power grid. While standing in a massive puddle, the 2 standard guards dropped their weapons, their bodies locking up in rigid, agonizing spasms. Smoke began to pour from the joints of their armor as the localized heat fried their internal nervous systems and the suits. Biomonitors! They collapsed backward into the water, twitching erratically as the current cooked them alive in their own high-tech shells. The squad leader, however, was different. His armor was slightly bulkier, marked with the crimson slash of his rank. His internal dampeners fought the current. He fell to one knee, roaring in pain. But he didn't go down. With a supreme agonizing effort, he punched his heavy gauntlet into the quartz floor, shattering the tile, and used the leverage to drag himself out of the electrified water and onto the dry, raised platform of the fountain where the hostages were cowering. Henry ripped the wire out of the water, severing the current. The station lights flickered and died, leaving the atrium bathed entirely in the eerie red glow of the emergency strobes. Henry dropped the wire. He picked up his shattered, bloody carbon fiber mop handle. He limped toward the fountain. The squad leader was standing over Chloe. The giant alien was heavily damaged. His armor was sparking, his movements sluggish. He had dropped his plasma carbine in the water, but he drew a heavy serrated combat blade from a sheath on his thigh. The blade was nearly 3 feet long, humming with a low-frequency sonic field designed to cut through armor plating. The alien grabbed Chloe by the hair, hauling her to her feet, placing the humming blade against her throat. The leader looked at Henry. He didn't see a janitor anymore. He saw a monster. "Stop!" The squad leader commanded, his mechanical translator glitching slightly, his voice distorted and harsh. "Drop your weapon, Terran, or the female dies." Henry stopped 15 feet away. He leaned heavily on his broken spear. He was bleeding from his mouth, his shoulder, and a dozen deep lacerations on his arms. He looked like walking death. He didn't look at the alien. He looked at Chloe. She was weeping silently, her hands gripping the alien's massive armored wrist, trying to pull the humming blade away from her skin. She looked at Henry, her eyes wide with terror, but also with a strange, desperate trust. Henry took a slow, rattling breath. His ribs flared with blinding pain. "You don't understand humans very well, do you?" Henry said. His voice wasn't loud. It was soft, rasping, and utterly devoid of mercy. "Drop the weapon," the alien roared, pressing the blade closer. A thin line of blood appeared on Chloe's neck. "We don't negotiate," Henry said, taking a slow step forward. "We don't play by your rules, and we definitely don't let people who hurt our kids walk away." Henry didn't drop the spear. He didn't surrender. He tightened his grip on the carbon fiber, locked eyes with the towering armored god of war, and prepared to show him the absolute bottomless depths of human violence. The hum of the sonic blade was a low, invasive frequency that vibrated in the fillings of Henry's teeth. The Athonian squad leader pressed the edge closer. A single bead of bright red blood welled on Chloe's throat, tracking a slow, terrifying path down into the collar of her jacket. Her breath hitched, a soft, pathetic sound that tore at something deep and buried inside Henry's chest. "Drop it," the alien repeated, his mechanical voice grating through the ruined atrium. "Your species is soft. You belong in the dirt, cleaning our waste. You cannot beat the Aegis." Henry stood 15 feet away. His right arm hung limp, dislocated at the shoulder from the earlier impact with the marble pillar. His ribs threatened to splinter inward with every inhalation. He looked old. He looked broken. He looked like an exhausted minimum wage laborer who had wandered into a meat grinder by mistake. The squad leader smiled beneath his featureless obsidian visor, a gesture communicated entirely through the arrogant tilt of his massive shoulders. He believed he had won. He believed that the baseline parameters of power had reasserted themselves. Henry slowly raised his left hand. He held the broken carbon fiber mop handle, the makeshift spear, with its rusted, tungsten-tipped box cutter. "You're right," Henry said, his voice a growly whisper that barely cut through the hissing emergency strobes. "We're soft. We don't have carbon-laced bones. We don't have twin hearts. We don't have millions of credits invested in genetic optimization." He took one slow, agonizing step forward. "When we bleed, we stay bled," Henry continued, his eyes locking onto the center of the alien's visor. "When our bones break, they stay broken. And because of that, we learned something the universe forgot a long time ago." That the squad leader tensed, tightening his grip on Chloe's hair. "Silence trash. We learned how to be spiteful," Henry whispered. He didn't throw the spear, he dropped it. The carbon fiber pole clattered uselessly against the quartz floor. The Athonian leader blinked behind his visor, a flicker of genuine confusion registering in his tactical hoodie. The human had disarmed himself. The mathematical probability of victory dropped to 0. It was the mistake the alien was bred to make. He calculated threats based on weapons, armor, and kinetic output. He didn't calculate for raw, unfiltered human malice before the leader could tighten the sonic blade or react. Henry didn't step back. He lunged forward, abandoning all pretense of defense, throwing his entire 58-year-old body straight down the line of the blade. The humming sonic edge sliced through Henry's left forearm, shearing cleanly through the muscle and biting deep into the bone. Pain so bright and blinding white detonated in his nervous system that his vision flashed completely white. He didn't scream. He didn't even flinch. He used the momentum of his own mutilated arm to slam his body weight directly into the alien's chest. The shock of the unexpected, unhedged collision caught the 8-foot giant off balance. The squad leader staggered backward, his footing compromised on the slick, chemical-foamed floor. His grip on Chloe slipped. She fell hard to the side, gasping, clutching her bleeding neck, scrambling backward out of the kill zone. Henry was right inside the alien's guard now, too close for the long combat blade to be effective, too close for the heavy armor to protect the vulnerable seals beneath the arms and throat. The alien roared, dropping the blade and bringing its massive armored hands up to crush Henry's skull. Henry was faster. He didn't have speed, but he had terminal desperation. He drove his forehead straight up, smashing his skull directly into the unprotected lower rim of the alien's helmet visor. The sound of cartilage and bone snapping was mutual. Henry's nose exploded in a torrent of blood, but the impact cracked the internal locking mechanism of the Athonian's helmet. With a frantic berserk fury, Henry jammed his remaining functional fingers, the calloused, scarred fingers of a man who had spent 40 years scraping grease, grime and blood off the floors of the galaxy, directly into the fractured seam of the alien's visor. He found a loose wire. He found a soft organic joint beneath the carbon plating, and he ripped. The internal seals gave way with a violent hiss of pressurized nitrogen. The obsidian faceplate popped free, tearing away and clattering across the floor, exposing the pale, hairless, terrifyingly vulnerable face of the elite Athonian warrior beneath. The alien gasped, its twin mouths opening wide in primal, unadulterated terror, its eyes widening as it looked into the face of a human who had nothing left to lose. Henry didn't hesitate. He grabbed the alien by its exposed throat with his blood-soaked hand, his fingers sinking deep into the flesh, and slammed the giant's head backward against the marble edge of the fountain. Once, twice, 3 times. The 4th time the movement stopped. The massive, genetically engineered, invincible apex predator of the Galactic Coalition went completely limp, sliding down the marble basin until it collapsed into a heap on the ruined foam-covered floor. The spire fell utterly, completely silent. The emergency strobes continued to pulse in rhythmic crimson waves, casting long, fractured shadows across the bodies of the 12 elite guards. Henry stood alone in the center of the atrium. His left arm hung at a grotesque angle, blood pouring freely from the deep gash across his forearm, soaking his faded blue jumpsuit. His face was a mask of crimson. His ribs throbbed with a white-hot agony that made every breath a battle. He swayed on his feet, his knees buckling slightly. He reached down, picked up his heavy-duty carbon fiber mop handle, and used it like a cane to keep from falling. 10 feet away, Chloe was sitting on the floor, trembling violently, staring at him, not with pity or condescension, but with a quiet, trembling awe that transcended species, politics, and status. From the North Corridor, the heavy pneumatic blast doors finally hissed open. Station security. Dozens of heavily armed Vesk and Coalition officers poured into the atrium, their weapons raised, ready to engage the terrorist threat. They froze. They lowered their weapons one by one, their jaws dropping as they looked around the room. 12 dead Athonians, a completely destroyed tactical stronghold, and in the middle of it all an old, broken human in a blue sanitation jumpsuit, leaning on a mop handle, wiping blood from his eyes. Henry looked at the security captain, a four-armed vest, whose multiple eyes were wide with utter disbelief. Henry let out a long, ragged, bloody sigh. He shifted his weight, his bad knee throbbing, and cleared his throat. "Tor 4 is a mess," Henry rasped, his voice cutting through the ringing silence of the room. "Somebody get a bucket. I'm off the clock in 10 minutes." 12 elite killers walked into a room they thought they owned, carrying weapons designed to conquer worlds. They met an old man with a bad back, an overdue bill, and a mop. What followed wasn't a war. It was a ruthless reminder that humanity's true terrifying edge isn't forged in expensive labs or high-tech armor, but in the stubborn, bloody refusal to break. If this story resonated with you, show your support. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more grounded, visceral storytelling.